Okay, right. So you'll see how that exercise flows into the next one, which is where do you stand on the question of immigration? And here again, I'm going to, it's definitely a spectrum, okay? I'm going to offer two positions. I'm going to offer the position of Matthew Schultz, who writes for a magazine called First Things. Now, First Things, if you want a solid, thoughtful, Christian, right-of-centre take on the questions of our day, First Things is the magazine to go to. It's a very, very good, substantial resource. And up against it, I'm going to take Hart and Negri. They're two Marxists, as that happens. Now, let's not prejudge. They are, as it happens, two Marxists, but they wrote a book that came out in 2000 called Empire, and it argued for a borderless world. So that's very extreme. There aren't very many people who argue for that position. But I'm picking them as their extreme. So do see Hart and Negri's right here, because I don't think anybody will be actually here, unless Alabama surprises me. If so, I love you for it. So one of you will just decide to stand here for the privilege of surprising me. You get a seat if you are actually an uncomplicated Marxist, but you might have the feeling that you are sympathetic to what they're saying, so you might end up about here. And again, it's very much a spectrum. It's really important that you see that it's a spectrum. And given that I'm already standing here, let me make the case for a borderless world. States are an invention of modernity. They actually didn't exist originally. There's nothing innate about the state. The state is an evolution, primarily, actually, of the Reformation. So what actually happened is, you'll recollect that Christendom was basically all of Europe, and then this upstart little monk had the temerity to challenge His Holiness the Pope, and, a German prince saw this as an opportunity to get out from underneath the Pope. You can sort of date the state from modernity. And since then, of course, we've been drawing lines on maps ever since, and it's been deeply destructive. In the First World War, you'll remember that the French and the British decided to sit down and carve up the Ottoman Empire. Cartographers in London decided where to draw the line. That's the reason why Syria is just a crude straight line. I mean, no country would have a crude straight line as its natural border. And that's the reason why Syria was always doomed to start, because the cartographers in London knew nothing about the lives of the people on the ground. But they create this artificial state. They divide the Middle East up. In fact, if you want a crude example of colonialism leading to war and Islamic extremism, blame the French and the British when they carved up the Ottoman Empire in the First World War. The Ottoman Empire was stable for hundreds of years, and there were none of these issues for centuries. And then the British and the French decided to carve up the Ottoman Empire at the end of the First World War, and they created mayhem. So what drives the creation of states? I'll tell you what drives the creation of states. It's power, it's control, it's capital. That drives the control of land mass. What people want to do is they want to entrench certain, primarily, ownership of land. That's the great idea of modernity. That's the great idea of the emergence of the modern state. And then what you see happen is that the only people who are actually mobile around this world are the rich and powerful. The rich and powerful can get visas to work anywhere. The rich and powerful can have multiple passports. The rich and powerful can get out of a war zone and get their family and their relatives to somewhere safe. But the poor, they have to stay with the drug gangs. The poor, they have to stay in the war zone. The poor have to suffer. So what we just need to do is blow up these lines. They're not natural. They're not divinely sketched. They're not built into the system. We need to blow them up. We need a borderless world. So when problems happen in one part of the world, and you're a parent, and you love your kids, you can get them somewhere safe. Every single human being knows the agony of a parent with a child which is sick. Every single human being understands what it's like to have a loved one you want to rescue, and you'll do anything you can. These people who march in a caravan to the border, they're not evil. They just love their kids. So of course, we need to blow the borders up. They're serving power, they're serving capital, and they're evil. You know, I call them, Matthew Schultz, the first things, I call them immigration idealists. I call them utopian. You know, you met Reinhold Niebuhr yesterday evening, and many of you sort of thought he had a point, because what was true of Reinhold Niebuhr is there's a little nuance, there's a capacity to recognize that one way you do not solve any problem is to decide you have to start from somewhere else. You know that lovely apocryphal story of the Englishman in Belfast who wants to know how he gets to London, and the answer is, well, you don't start from here. You know, in the end, we've all got to start where we are. You know, people can present utopian visions and say, I want a world free of hunger, and free of violence, and free of abuse, and free of everything, and love them. They're lovely, but they're never going to go anywhere. The truth is that Hegel was right. Hegel was right when Hegel said, in the end, nations are cultures. And therefore, we've got to recognize that if you have a borderless world, then this land would be uninhabitable. It would be extraordinarily crowded. You wouldn't be able to live here. Everybody, of course, would come. So what would happen is our society would become disordered. Now, who gains from that vision of the world? Who gains from a world where our society is itself disordered? Every country has emerged and evolved around a particular cultural identity. And therefore, once you see that, then the right thing to do is to recognize that countries are entitled to say, we would welcome you on the understanding that you adapt to the place you're going to live in, you observe the laws of our land, and you bring some skills that can make a difference to our place. And what we, of course, should be doing, and I completely support this, is we should be sharing some of our wealth and resources with Central America to make sure those countries are stronger so people can live there happily. Of course, the American government should be supporting government actions against cartels which are creating gangs, which are making neighbourhoods unmanageable and unlivable in. That's right and proper, and that's what we should be doing, and there's been plenty of that in the past that the American government has done. But you can't simply say anybody who chooses should just come and live here. That's unrealistic. It will create mayhem. It will create a disordered society here. So in a Niebuhrian spirit of Christian realism, I invite you to say, okay, I hear the fantasy of the Marxist, but we've got to have a politics that makes some sense. And this is one which says, border controls are appropriate and proper. And, incidentally, there's nothing wrong with a wall. You know, of course, if there needs to be a wall in certain parts across between the United States and Mexico, there's nothing un-Christian about saying there should be a physical barrier at all. Physical barriers are sometimes necessary and appropriate. So we are a country of law. That's not a bad thing. We are a country who requires people who come here to do so legally. That's not a bad thing. We're a country which says we have a particular culture and a particular identity, and we want you to participate in the gift of that. That's not a bad thing. So be a Christian realist. Every single person must be able to empathize with a parent crying their eyes out because their children can't survive. If you would do anything in your power to help your child, then that simple maxim of our Lord, love your neighbour as yourself, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, applies. These border restrictions are a tool of money and capital. Now, it might take a long time to get there, but if the church isn't standing up for the reign of God and the kingdom, who is? I'm happy to defend the principle that a nation is allowed to have a border, a nation is allowed to welcome people they choose in. And I apply that principle using the Lord's principle, do unto others as you would have unto, they would do unto you, to every nation in the world. I think every nation in the world should have the same rights to create a boundary and determine who from outside is allowed to live there. There's nothing unchristian about that. Take a moment, chat to your neighbour, decide, or sit for a moment in solitude, or if you're not near somebody who wants to talk to you, feel free to move, and decide where you will walk on this spectrum.